Hi, Wayne.
Evening, Bill. How are you?
Oh, I'm just peachy keen.
Excellent, sir. The recording button and certainly jumping into this evening's Zoom event. We have some gentlemen here from the Indianapolis Executive Airport. One gentleman is an employee of the airport. The other gentleman is with the airport board. Certainly let both of you introduce yourselves and take it away.
Well, good evening. Thanks for joining us here. My name is Bill Fry. I'm the president of the Hamilton County Airport Authority, and we'll be going through our runway extension with you. And we've got, I hope, a presentation that will answer, I hope, most of your questions. But after that, we'll open it up for questions from the attendees and try to answer all your questions before we leave. Okay.
All right, yeah, and then real fast, I'll introduce myself. My name is Sam Sachs. I'm the airport director here at Indy Exec Airport. I started back in June, so I'm really going to rely on Mr. Fry to kind of fill everyone in on some of the history of the airport going back quite a few years. But any current questions you have, I can definitely try and answer to the best of my ability. With that, I'll let you go ahead and jump on in, Bill.
Okay. Let me set it up here. Okay, well, this is to talk about the runway extension project questions and answers. I know this has generated a lot of interest and comments in the community, so I hope we can answer everyone's questions here tonight. Just to start out, just some brief facts about the airport and its history. The airport began in 1957 as Terry Airport. Originally had a 3,000 foot by 60 foot paved runway running north-south, and also a 3,000 by 200 turf crosswind runway running northeast and southwest. In 1965, the airport was purchased by the Van Sickles, and they lengthened the runway to 5,160 feet in 1978, and further increased it to its current 5,500 by 100 feet in about 1990. In 1975, the Indianapolis Metropolitan Airport System Plan, abbreviated as MASP, recommended that Terry Airport eventually be acquired by a public entity to ensure the continued availability of the facility. They also indicated at that time the airport should be developed to accommodate all types of business aviation, including corporate jets. Also around that time, the airport was classified as a reliever airport for Indianapolis International Airport under the National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems. Reliever airports were designed by the FAA in order to reduce smaller aircraft traffic at major airports, because you have a lot of large commercial airliners coming in. You don't want smaller airplanes taking up airspace and runway space. So that whole system of reliever airports was started back then, and Terry Airport, or TYQ, was designated as a reliever airport. And also, by having that designation, it also opened it up to funding by the FAA. And consistent with the MASP recommendation, the Hamilton County Board of Aviation Commissioners, which subsequently became the Hamilton County Airport Authority, purchased the airport from the Van Sickles in 2003. And since then, the airport has received over $20 million in federal funds. Hamilton County and the state of Indiana have each provided an additional $2 million in capital. And Hamilton County provides approximately $600,000 annually in support of operating costs, capital funding, and partial payment on the bonds that we use to purchase the buildings. Other than the county, the only sources of revenue for the airport are leasing the airport buildings to First Wing Jet Center and Taft Aviation. First Wing is the FBO at the airport. FBO means fixed based operator. And they are the ones that provide fueling for the aircraft, maintenance. They operate the terminal area. They rent hangar space in the larger hangars, and Taft does the same thing in the smaller T hangars. In addition to that, we have land leases, specifically Bex Hybrids, who built their corporate hangar out at the airport a few years ago. And we have approximately 300 acres that we lease for farming every year. And then the final revenue stream is the county gets a small 19 cents or less, depending on the volume, per gallon of gas that's pumped at the airport. So a few facts about the runway extension. It's been in the planning stage since about 2006. In 2008, it was included in the master plan and the airport layout plan. And it really is in response to demand. And if I show you this, you can see over the years, starts from 1978 to just about to this year, and showing the number of based aircraft with time, and also the number of annual operations with time. So the airport's been on a pretty steady growth pattern for the last, 30 years or so, 40 years. Public workshops were held on the master plan in 2008 and on the runway extension environmental assessment in 2013. All told, there have been at least 15 public meetings, presentation, newspaper articles, and other correspondence. And there's a list of them if you kind of small to see, but we had the public hearing on the environmental assessment. We did a public information meeting on the master plan back in 2008. Had 50 people attend that, and the runway extension environmental assessment, we had 25 people attend that. So all the public comments at both of these, both the master plan session and the environmental assessment meeting, were both oral and written comments were obtained, and all those were shared with the FAA and INDOT. There's been a lot of questions about with the runway extension, are we going to get larger aircraft? The runway extension is not designed for larger aircraft. It is designed for the current mix of aircraft that use the airport today. We're increasing the runway length. We're not increasing the load bearing capacity. I know there's been some comments about comparing the runway length to, say, Midway in Chicago, but the Midway airport, that runway can handle about 2 or 3 times the weight that our runway can handle. And also, the runway extension does not mean that commercial airline service is coming to the airport. We're going to go into both of these subjects in detail a little bit later on here. So let's get into some of the questions that seem to have been raised about the airport. First of all, is the airport completing a runway extension? The answer to that is yes. That project has been underway for many years now, and it's gone through the initial parts of the extension program were to acquire necessary land for the runway protection zone and to make sure we had could get rid of some trees and things that were in the way. So it is underway. We're currently in a process of doing grading and drainage work and leveling. We have to level the end of the runway out, keep it the same level as the current runway. And paving will probably start either next year or the year after. So the next question is, why is it being extended? Here are the reasons for the extension. The runway extension is driven by demand. If you think back when I showed the curve there of the number of operations and the number of aircraft that are based at the airport, that continue to go up. And we're limited now by the fact that we cannot provide really a safety margin for meeting the design criteria, which is a runway length that allows 75% of the fleet that uses the airport, and that includes aircraft between 12,500 and 60,000 pounds, to operate at 90% useful loads in wet and icy conditions. The current runway doesn't provide the ability for the design aircraft to safely operate at efficient useful loads. And just to give you an idea, when we talk about the aircraft mix, these are the types of business jets that are typically using the airport, ranging from a Raytheon Premier up to the Gulfstreams. and MTOW means maximum takeoff weight. So we're really designing the runway extension to make operation of this particular mix of aircraft safer and more efficient under all weather conditions. Will larger aircraft such as 737s be permitted at the airport after the runway extension? The simple answer is yes and no. The yes part means that as an airport, we cannot prohibit an aircraft that needs to land. So if an aircraft happens to be in trouble and it happens to be a 737 and it needs to land somewhere, it can land at our airport. Routinely, however, the airport is not designed to handle aircraft over about 60,000 pounds maximum takeoff weight, which is about half the weight of a 737. So the answer to that is, in terms of routinely, we will not have any larger aircraft than are currently using the airport. But nobody can say what's going to happen with respect to if an airplane needs to land there and are in trouble, they'll land there. Will the airport provide commercial airline service? Well, the answer is no. Indianapolis Executive Airport is classified by the FAA as a general aviation airport. It is therefore restricted by the FAA from scheduled commercial airline service. Our master plan does not seek to change that classification. Reclassification to a commercial airport, which is called a Part 139 airport, would require not only FAA approval, but major modifications to the facilities. Now, FAA is very unlikely to approve us as a commercial airport, mainly because our airspace would then be in conflict with Indianapolis International. And the FAA doesn't like to have conflicting situations with major airports. So, and also the Hamilton County Airport Authority has no plans to seek funding for any of these recertification projects, either from the federal government or any state, county, or local entities. Are any other runway improvements being planned? The 2008 master plan includes the current 1,500-foot extension. Also included in the master plan were two other long-range projects, a further 700-foot extension to the existing runway, which would move that 75% of operating capacity to 100%, and a 400-foot crosswind runway for use by lighter aircraft. No action on either of the additional projects are being considered at this time, and neither are included as a part of the current runway extension. In the future, only projects that have a justifiable demand and a funding source will be considered. So in other words, we would not, it's really hard to imagine why there would be a demand for, say, a crosswind runway at this point. Although it's in the plan, so therefore we have to plan for it in things like the land use study. Also, the settlement agreement between Zionsville and the Airport Authority in 2015 addresses specific requirements for any future implementation of a crosswind runway. Let's see. Does the land use plan propose new airport improvements? The answer to that is no. What is shown in the plan is consistent with the master plan, which does show a crosswind runway. And the reason for that is that if 30 years from now we want to put a crosswind runway in, or there's a demand to put one in, the airspace is protected for it. It says, can the airport limit operations that take off to or land from the south? There's been a lot of questions on that. Which runway a pilot uses for takeoff or landing depends primarily on the wind direction. We only have one runway. It runs north-south. So there are conditions where the winds tend to come a little bit from the northwest, so we take off going to the north. If they're coming from the southwest, we take off and land going to the south. Or the other way around, actually. Arbitrarily designating which runway to use could jeopardize safety. So that is up to the pilot, and it's up to the weather conditions to determine which runway to use. Both runway 18 and runway 36 have what's known as GPS or RNAV approach, which means a pilot can come in on an automatic or a radio controlled approach. However, only runway 36 has what we call an instrument landing system, which is more precise and allows aircraft to land in poor weather conditions. Aircraft making an instrument approach to the airport are often directed by air traffic control as to which runway to use, and air traffic control out of Indianapolis will route air traffic into one direction or the other, depending on how busy the flight pattern is around Indianapolis International Airport. Let's see, will aircraft approaching from the south be lower because of the longer runway? Well, we're extending the runway by 15 feet or 1,500 feet, which moves the touchdown point by 1,500 feet as well. So this is what was called a guided approach. This would be an ILS approach or a GPS approach into runway 36, coming from the south to the north. And so with the extended runway and the threshold moved back 1,500 feet from where it is now, the altitude decrease between the old approach pattern and the new one is about 80 feet. So the planes will be 80 feet closer. This shows you a height comparison. This red line here that's the height of the One America Tower in downtown Indianapolis. So if you want to get a feel for how high 500 feet is, or 420 feet, or whatever it happens to be, that will help you put that in perspective. And then the final question I've got here is, what about the impact of noise? Noise is a difficult thing to get subjective on, but let's talk about a few things that were done with respect to the noise analysis. We generated noise contours, which generated using FAA prescribed methodology, and that was done for the year of 2011, which is when the analysis was done, 2021, so basically next year, and 2031. And there's a methodology, a computer methodology that the FAA prescribes that takes into account the mix of aircraft, the time they operate, how many operations per day, and it increases those over time to take in the growth of traffic within the airport. In fact, they probably made it more than what traffic is going to be, just to be on the safe side. So the FAA defines significance as an increase of 1.5 decibels within the outside 65 decibel day-night limit contour as a measure of significance. Now that probably sounds like gibberish, but let me explain what that is a little bit. First of all, no current residential areas to the south of the airport lie within the 65 decibel DNL contour. Noise is measured in decibels. It's a measure of the ratio between two different sound pressures. So if you double the sound intensity, that results in a 3 decibel change. A 60 decibel sound, such as normal speech, is 1,000,000 times more intense than a barely detectable sound, such as a faint whisper. So each of these decibel readings here of 60 to 70, 70, 80 are a 10-fold increase in sound intensity. To measure the day-night, or the 65 day-night average sound level, that's used to reflect a person's cumulative exposure to sound over a 24-hour period, and it's weighted by a factor of 10 for nighttime operations. So sound levels are taken at intervals of time over a 24-hour period, and then the nighttime operations are further deficited by an additional 10 decibel penalty. And that's because nighttime is more quiet. And then another noise metric is something called the sound exposure level, which represents all the acoustic energy of an individual noise event normalized to 1 second duration. So an approach would have a higher SEL than a takeoff because it takes longer for an aircraft to go over on an approach than it does on a takeoff. So looking at measurements of SEL, so if you're a large aircraft like a 747 or something, one event per day might give you the 65 DNL contour. If you're a medium-sized airplane, like maybe a 737 or maybe even larger, would take 10 events per day to give you a 65 DNL. For smaller aircraft like the jets that we have, which generally run between an SEL of 82 to 90 on approach and 75 to 85 on takeoff, you're talking 100 or more events per day to make that 65 DNL. It, again, sounds is very subjective. One person's sensitivity to sound is not the same as the other. So these have been an attempt to kind of make it a more quantitative way of looking at it. So again, the noise analysis that were done show no significant impact for FAA standards. And if we look at the contours we developed, the green lines are the solid green shows the year 2031 with no increase in the runway length. The dotted line shows the 65 DNL contour in the year 2031 with the runway extension. Again, this doesn't extend in any residential areas. It only encroaches a little bit on what's known as the Cato property in 2031. So this would be the area of concern that the EPA would look for a change in noise level of 1.5 decibels or more. Portions of Fieldstone, Brookhaven, and the Willows, including the Union Elementary School, lie within a noise sensitive area as defined by the state of Indiana. And Indiana defines noise sensitive area as any region 1,500 feet on either side of a runway center line running for a different distance of 1 nautical mile from the airport boundary. So builders are required to obtain a permit to build in a noise sensitive area and must include, in fact, I'll show you, here's the noise sensitive area, by the way, in terms of a diagram. This is roughly, it's not exact, but this rectangular shaded area is the noise sensitive area extending 1,500 feet on either side of our center line to 1 nautical mile south. So the areas of Fieldstone, Brookhaven, and a little bit of the Willows is inside the defined noise sensitive area. Builders are required to obtain a permit to build in a noise sensitive area and must include a statement in closing documents notifying the buyer that the residence may be subject to noise from airport operations. And this is the exact wording of what should be in any of the closing papers of any of the homes inside the noise sensitive area. This, the permittee acknowledges for itself, its heirs, its successors, and its assigns that the real estate described in this permit experiences or may experience significant levels of aircraft operations, and that the permittee is erecting a building designed for noise sensitive use upon the real estate with the full knowledge and acceptance of the aircraft operations as well as any effects resulting from the aircraft operations. That's required by the state of Indiana. There's been some issues about the school, but one thing I wanted to point out was the airport opposed the siting of the Union Elementary School where it is. You can't read this, but this is a letter from the president of the airport Board of Aviation Commissioners at the time to president of the Zionsville Community Schools, strongly urging them not to put the school where they wanted to put it. You can see there were some newspaper articles around the same time. I apologize for the poor quality, but these are the best copies I could find. And also when the Indiana Department of Transportation issued a permit for the school, they included that phrase that I just showed you. And there was also a real estate company that actually had a plot of land that they were willing to swap for the school. So, however, the school board went and had the state of Indiana looked at it, said, we're not thrilled by it, but it meets the criteria. So it was allowed to go there. All right, we did that. All right, that's finishes my presentation. Do we have questions? Let's see.
Yeah, Bill, I've been answering questions over here in the chat box.
Okay.
During your speech there. So I've answered about 7 of them so far. I have a few of them teed up here. So I'll just go ahead and kind of run through them real fast and save me some time typing here. So Tyson has asked why the ILS system is on runway 36 instead of runway 18. And from what I understand, it was initially set up on runway 36 mainly because of the prevailing winds into the airport, which typically favor a northern facing approach into the airport.
That's good.
So that dictated having the ILS system shooting south out of here. In terms of adding one on 18, it's not something we've ruled out. It's a lot of money and a lot of work to add an ILS system. And we do have a GPS system in the runway 18, which is a more modern system anyway. But we haven't ruled out adding another ILS onto runway 18. Moving down, in terms of the flight school planes, that's a question from Al here. So I don't know about training increasing because right now with the 5,500 foot runway, that's probably twice as much as they honestly need, even as we stand right now. Many of the flight schools that we have coming through here are actually from other airports. They fly out of Indianapolis International, or some of the other regional metropolitan, some of the other airports around here, and they come here to train, which they do at all the other Indianapolis airports as well. They kind of go around and hit a lot of these airports, but we are one of their favorite targets. So we are a public use airport, general aviation public use airport, so we really have no ability to limit flight schools or really any aircraft that comes into the airport doing any kind of legal operation. Give me 1 second here to keep reading. In terms of an increase in traffic, that's most likely going to happen with or without a runway extension. If you look at our annual traffic numbers, which you can actually find on NDOT's website, you'll see that we typically increase our annual aircraft operations by 2,000 to 5,000 operations each year. I believe last year we increased by about 2,500 operations. We currently stand around 41,000 operations a year, and we expect that to continue to climb. So yeah, we do expect the operations to go up. I don't know if there's going to be a significant jump with the longer runway or not, but there will be an increase most likely. Give me 1 minute to read this next question here from Tyson.
I read it. I can answer that one if you'd like. While you read.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Well, when the school was put in, again, the airport recommended against it, but we did work with the builder, and there was extra soundproofing and other, extra soundproofing put in the school to try to mitigate any noise issues that might come up. So let's see where the answer goes.
Sorry,
okay.
I may have knocked it off the list there. Hopefully, you read all of it. Was there anything else to add to that one, Bill?
No, I think
okay.
The mitigation was done when the school was built. There was extra insulation put in to keep the noise level in the schools to low.
Okay. This next question is about the parcel of land south of the airport and the development there. Do you want to take that one, Bill? I know you're pretty familiar with all the happenings of that area of land.
Yeah, of course. There again, I mean, the way to mitigate noise problems is not to build in the first place. We're very concerned about development in that area between Brookhaven and 200 South, primarily because the plans we've seen show retention ponds, and retention ponds attract birds, and birds don't do well inside jet engines. Particularly when aircraft will be coming in, fairly low and slow on approach. So we're not happy about them trying to put in more residential areas south of there. We have made recommendations for, obviously they have the right to do it if they can get permission from the town of Zionsville to do it. But we are putting, trying to get them to deploy or redesign the area to keep the area closest to the airport as parkland or open area. Just because, like I say, any homes they build there are going to be that much closer to the airport. Really people aren't going to be happy living there.
All right, I'll go ahead and knock this next one out here from Tim about County Road 1100. So yeah, this has been an issue for us in terms of maintaining that road. So it's a bit convoluted because we have various contractors from different projects that actually come in here using County Road 1100 and dumping their dirt next to the airport. It's not actually a airport run project. A lot of it is actually coming from the 146th Street expansion and the different contractors they're using. So we've had some difficulty kind of keeping track of who's kind of coming down that road. But we have instructed our contractor to go over there and maintain it and sweep it on a daily basis. And then in terms of the potholes that are developing on the side of the road there, that is something that Hamilton County, the Highway Department for Hamilton County will be fixing once that project is completed. So we want to wait until after all the trucks have kind of come down the road, so we avoid having more potholes and having to fix them over and over. So those definitely will be fixed. I drive down that road at least once a week to check it out, and I know it's frustrating, so I do apologize for that.
I'll take this one on the funding. Tyson Clemmer asked a question: would the approximate $600,000 in annual funding provided by Hamilton County to keep the airport in operation, what is the intended benefit to Hamilton County by the ongoing ownership and operation of the airport? The airport does not benefit just Hamilton County. The Indiana Department of Transportation, INDOT, and Aviation Indiana did a study, let's see, 2012, I guess it was, to look at the economic impact of all the airports in Indiana and the areas surrounding the airport. And they have assigned a value to the Indianapolis Executive Airport, to the region, to the area, Hamilton, Boone County area, of over $400 million. Right now we have about 60 people who are full-time employed at the airport, both at the FBO and at BEX. Many of them live in Boone County. Many of the contractors who received some of that $20 million or more that was spent there are contractors in the Zionsville area, Boone County and Hamilton County, as well as Indianapolis. So Hamilton County is not the only beneficiary to having the airport there. We attract companies like to locate, if they have a private jet, they like to locate somewhere nearby where their jet is. And many of the businesses, many of the jets that are at the airport right now are owned by companies or that either their CEOs live in Zionsville or the company or itself is located in Zionsville. So it really is a regional airport in terms of serving both Hamilton and Boone County, as well as some northern parts of Indianapolis or Marion County. So.
All right, I'll go ahead and take this next one here from Bart, addressing the crosswind runway. So there's not a specific trigger that would trigger us looking into the crosswind runway. That was put into our master plan about 12 years ago, largely as a conceptual idea of, what would the ideal airport setup be, but there wasn't, a number where it said, okay, after we hit 50,000 annual operations, we're going to build a crosswind runway. There's no specific triggers like that. I can tell you that we have no plans for many years to do anything with the crosswind runway. There'd be a lot of money that have to be put into it, and the benefit would probably not be there for any time in the near future. So that's not something we're even thinking about at the moment.
The crosswind runway really, the reason it was there before was in part for glider traffic, but also for very light aircraft and even the 172s and so forth these days can land in a relatively strong crosswind, which is what you get with a north-south runway and a predominantly east-west wind pattern. So that, like I said, as I said in the presentation, we would only consider that if the demand was there and if the funding was there. And you might have one, but you may not have both.
All right, we'll move on to this next question here about planes landing at night. So I mentioned this earlier in one of the earlier answered questions, but being a public use, uncontrolled, which means we don't have air traffic control here, airport, we really don't have a way of stopping aircraft from coming in at night. If you kind of think of our airport as a rest stop along the highway, cars can stop at the rest stop any hour of the day. You're going to get a lot less cars and likewise a lot less planes coming in at night. But there's really not much we can do to stop aircraft. Now, if we had an air traffic control tower, you're more likely to be able to control that. But in an uncontrolled airport, it's a pilot controlled operation here. So,
and there also are grant assurances because we get FAA funding. There are grant assurances that say you have to, you can't do anything in the airport that's going to, how do they put it, economic non-discrimination. So if you've got businesses or flying in, usually leaving early in the morning, if you restrict their hours, they can say, well, you're restricting my ability to do business, and that's against the law, against our assurances with the FAA. So like Sam said, an airport has very limited ability to control the operations. Now, the FBO, which is the main services the aircraft, is open from 6 in the morning till 9 at night. So aircraft that come in after 9 at night may not want to come in just because they can't get fuel. But ones that are based there, of course, have some place to park, but others don't. So, but
yeah. Moving on here. Question from Dave. This is a good one about the ILS for the runway. So the ILS will have to be relocated with the runway extension. And moving it to runway 1A, I'm not sure if that was ever discussed historically. And if it was that easy, it might be something we would consider. But it's more than just moving the components. Unfortunately, there's utilities that have to be run. And there's various repainting of the runway that has to be done. Because there's special markings for the ILS, and there's an FAA component called flight check where they set up the approaches. So there's a lot more that goes into it than simply relocating. I don't know, Bill, if that ever came up of moving the ILS.
Well, it was put there, like you said before, because that was where the prevailing winds said that was where you want to put a precision approach. But it's not just a simple matter of, like you said, not simply a matter of turning the antenna around. There's two components to an ILS. One is the glide slope, which gives a plane a way of coming in at a certain angle and making sure they don't hit the ground. And then there's the localizer beam, which keeps them on the center line. So you'd have to relocate both of those. Now, in our case, the localizer is way up at the far end of runway 36, almost right there by 32. And so that would have to be totally turned around and relocated down the south end, and it might not be able to be somewhere where it's going to work right, because there's a lot of terrain issues down at the south end of the runway that aren't at the north end. So
and like I kind of mentioned earlier, I'd say you're more likely to see a second ILS system go in as opposed to simply relocating the one we have. All right, next question here from Wes about the largest aircraft. It really won't change. As Bill mentioned earlier in the presentation, the runway length doesn't necessarily dictate the aircraft that comes in. It's more of the weight of the aircraft. The runway isn't any stronger, so we really can't have larger aircraft come in. So right now, we typically see Gulfstream 500s as our largest aircraft that comes through here. Which is just a standard looking business jet, slightly larger. We're not going to see anything on a standard typical daily basis, anything bigger than that. And even then, that's maybe a couple times a month that we get an aircraft that large.
Each type of aircraft has its own requirements as to what it needs in terms of runway length based upon the weather, based upon how much fuel it has, based on how many passengers it's carrying. And so that's one reason. The reason for length in the runway is to make sure that we can safely handle aircraft that come in or want to take off with a full load of fuel and full load of passengers which for business jet might be 15 people. And then there again, it depends on the weather. An airplane that like a citation or something needs a longer runway to stop when the runway is wet or icy than it does when it's not. So, I mean, it could use a 35 or 4,500 foot runway on perfect conditions, but when it's raining or icy out, it needs 6,000 or 7,000 feet. So but the size of the aircraft that we're having there is not going to change. With basically the same mix, because as Sam said, the runway load bearing capacity, how much weight it can handle, is not changing. We're just lengthening it.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next question from Al about where the flight training can be done. So I believe we mentioned it earlier, but the direction in which the planes fly around the airport is directly tied to the winds. So aircraft fly into the wind. So if we have wind coming from the north, it means aircraft, when they're flying, whether it's approaching or departing the airport, are flying north. And then obviously the opposite of that would be if the winds are coming from the south, they're flying south. So we find our wind slightly more than average coming from the north, which means they use our runway 36, which means they are landing to the north. So when they leave, they're flying north, but when they're approaching, they're coming from the south. And there really isn't much we can do about that, of course. I would say that, if in a calm wind scenario, the planes should be more in the rural area, more north of the airport, but rarely do we seem to have calm winds at the airport here. All right, move on to the next question here from Tim. Again, same idea about small single-gen aircraft flying along 1100 east there. So they're going to fly on 1100 east sides on the west side of the airport when our northern runway, so runway 36, is activated. And then they're going to fly on the other side of the airport on the eastern side when we're flying into runway 18, so the southbound runway. Again, there's not much we can do about that. In terms of the altitude, aircraft have a very specific altitude that they fly. When they're flying around an airport, everything is described in aviation manuals put out by the FAA, and they fly at 1,000 feet. That's their standard pattern altitude when they're around the airport is 1,000 feet. And of course, they come lower when they're making that final turn into the runway. But when they're adjacent to the runway, they should be at 1,000 feet.
The exception to that is when a student pilot is learning to fly, they have to learn how to fly in emergency. And sometimes they'll do what's called a dead engine approach, which sometimes brings them in lower, even though the engine's still going. They're simulating an engine out approach. And so when you have an engine out situation, you're not taking the wide path around. You want to get down as quickly as you can. And that's basically flight school people are doing that.
Yeah, that's typically what you see flying around the airport during the day. Moving on, looks like Wes had a question about our operations and the increase over time. So as I mentioned earlier, we have, as we stand now, an estimated 41,000 annual operations a year. Puts us, I believe, number 8 in the state in operations, maybe 9. And all that information is available on NDOT's aviation page. They have an Excel spreadsheet where you can see every public airport in the state and their annual operations. In terms of increasing over time, how will that change over time? It's impossible to say, and it's impossible to say what kind of mix of aircraft. Right now we see a pretty even mix, I'd say, of business travel and then general aviation travel as well. I would say it has increased more towards the business side of things, and that may continue. But we don't have any kind of estimate or official estimate of what the traffic count will be in the future years.
The traffic, the airport growth, if you remember from those slides I showing the number of operations, the number of aircraft, the airport grows in response to the economic viability and the economic growth of the area. We're not pushing any economic growth. We're being dragged along by the demand for, as the area gets more economically viable and more businesses move up here and want to use private jets, it's going to grow. And even our private pilots, we saw a huge increase in people taking flying lessons during the COVID shutdown. I guess people had time on their hands or something. So. Okay, let's see.
All right, so we have another question. Give me a second to read this one here from Tyson.
Okay, I'll start to answer it. A couple of things. One, you said the public presentation of the runway extension was in 2013, before many of the homes that are now on the direct flight path were even built. That's true, but as I pointed out before, any of the homes that were built in the noise-sensitive area, the builder should have notified the people buying the houses that it's a noise-sensitive area and showed you that stipulation that the state of Indiana requires for any homes that are built in a noise-sensitive area. You talked about the flight operations data and the noise study from 2011. The study was done in 2011, but the methodology that was used looked at growth in airport, both in air flight traffic and also the type of airplanes that would be coming in and out of the airport, to use to predict. And again, this is a very standard FAA model that takes into account the mix of aircraft, the type of aircraft, the type of engines that they have, how many operations they're going to do in a particular length of time. So those projections didn't rely on simply looking at what was going on in 2011. It said, okay, given the growth rate, and they assumed the growth rate, in fact, their number of operations for 2021 were a lot higher than we're actually seeing. So like I say, it's a bit conservative in terms of how it projected forward. But again, it did that for 2011, 2021, and 2031 using growth model for the airport and the type of aircraft mix. So if anything, it's probably conservative, because like I said, the number of operations that was projected was quite a bit more than what we have now.
And in terms of officially reevaluating and doing another noise study, we haven't planned anything on the horizon to do that yet. So that might be something we do in the next couple of years, but no plans at the moment.
And there was a comment made, I saw somewhere that said, well, how they measured it now? Well, as you saw from the data, you can't really take and sit there and monitor it for a year at a time, every so many seconds or minutes to get the average. It's done, again, the FAA approved methodology is to use the data on the aircraft. And we have a lot of extensive data on every single aircraft type, and what its noise levels are on takeoff, what its noise level on approach. And all that data is fed into the computer model, and that generates the contours given the characteristics of both the number of operations but the type of aircraft. And that's probably as accurate as you're going to get, because I mean, you could get down there at noontime and some day and take a noise reading, and there's no planes. So that's going to bias your data if you go there at the wrong times of the day.
All right, we'll move on to the next question. We have 26 questions right now, so we'll try and get through all of these as quickly as we can. So one from Mark about the flight pattern for the crosswind. So as I mentioned, there's no official plans for a crosswind except for kind of a conceptual idea. But my guess would be it'd be both sides, again, depending on the winds. Aircraft fly to the left, so when they take off and they stay in a pattern, they fly left. So in theory, they fly on either side of the runway. Again, there's no official plans yet. Nothing's been drawn up for a flight pattern for a crosswind, but that's what it will most likely look like if that ever happened. It looks like this next question might be more for you, Wayne. I definitely can't speak on Zionsville and their taxes, so I don't know if Wayne, if you want to mention anything, or if not, we can kind of move on from that. It's up to you.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have anything specific to add to that. We can certainly take that question and run it through the process from your legislative folks.
Well, because also too, I mean, there has to be data that shows that property values are decreasing because of the airport. And I doubt, I don't know if you can find that data or if it's even true.
All right, so we'll move on here. Next question is from Tim about helicopter traffic at the airport. That's a good one. So I might have mentioned earlier about different prescribed altitudes and stuff for different patterns around the airport. Well, helicopters are exempt from that because of the very nature. So there really is no minimum altitude on a typical operation, especially on an approach to an airport for a helicopter to fly. Now, when they're away from an airport, they should be 500 feet above the ground, especially in a rural area. That's their typical minimum, but they do have FAA exemption to fly lower. And I know when they come into the airport, they typically approach differently than aircraft, obviously. They don't actually use the runway on a typical occasion. They typically come straight into our ramp, which takes them all kinds of different ways into the airport. So there really isn't anything from a legal standpoint that can be done. And we can mention it to specific pilots as they come in. We can request that, hey, can you try and keep your altitude higher until you're over the airport property? But legally, there's not much that can happen there.
Some of the helicopter traffic you see around the airport is not airport traffic. There are helicopters that fly the pipelines and electrical lines, and they fly fairly low. So a lot of times when you see a low-flying helicopter, it's somebody following the gas lines or the electrical lines. You said, why did the person who did the report? I don't know what report you're referring to, but the 3 to 5 years in the land use study was because that was started about 2000. No, I mean 2000 and let's see when we started that, 2017, I guess, 18. It was at that time projected that the north-south runway extension would occur in 3 to 5 years. I don't know what commissioner told you 9 to 10 years. I can't vouch for that. I just said 30. What I was trying to say is that there are no immediate plans in any foreseeable time scale that I can envision that we would go ahead with the crosswind runway. If demand says we need to do it, and the FAA says they think we should do it, then, as it was mentioned in the report, we have that would be the town of Zionsville would get involved in that. In our agreement with Zionsville on the runway, we said that any crosswind runway would require approval by or input by the town of Zionsville. So I'm kind of being a little bit vague. I mean, it's not impossible that we would try at some point to go and get a crosswind runway, but in any reasonable time frame, it's pretty unlikely. Just because we don't see a demand for it.
All right, next question about the construction going on, the construction traffic on 1100 East. So most of that construction traffic you see on 1100 East is our dirt trucks bringing in dirt from largely the 146th Street project. That's where most of that's coming from. Without having my engineer on the call here, I don't know exactly how much longer they plan on adding to that dirt pile. That has a lot to do with how much dirt they need for the work that's going on the southern side. Bill, I don't know if you have a better answer to that. I don't know if we have a time.
We're pretty much, I don't think we're going to be bringing much more dirt onto the site for the drainage and landscaping, drainage and fill. What we have done is, for all the work now, we're removing the dirt from where it is there up by 1100 to the south, is we've built an inside road. There's a road that's inside our fence that those trucks are going back and forth on, so that there should be very little traffic on 1100 East associated with our project.
That's true. Yeah, we specifically stipulated that they should keep as much of the work on the property and off the county roads.
And that was, yeah, that was a decision we made, given the fact that we saw when they were bringing the dirt on, that road was getting kind of dirty. So I said, well, let's not use the county roads to do the south. We'll put a road in ourselves and use it, and they'll use that road for moving dirt from the north part of the field to the south part of the field.
All right, moving on. Bill, I don't know if you want to talk more about noise abatement. The question here is about noise abatement in other airports that have restrictions.
Yeah, noise abatement is generally associated with, you know, commercial Part 139 airports, major airports in major cities. Again, there's not, like we mentioned before, we have very little flexibility in doing noise abatement because of the restrictions of our FAA regulations. So let's see, look around, see, I'm aware of other airport, yeah. Again, my understanding is most of the noise abatement are on commercial airports or airports that are right in the middle of, you know, urban areas, downtown airports, that kind of thing. So
yeah, I think some of the best examples are in Southern California and Los
right.
area. That's where you see a lot of noise abatement that occurs, especially out of general aviation airports. Probably some of the few examples I can think of in the country actually that kind of to meet that. But obviously, like you said, that's a highly urbanized, very densely populated area. And the FAA doesn't typically push for any kind of noise abatement plan at airports outside of these, you know, metropolises, basically. If you want to go ahead and we'll move on to the next one here about the master plan done in 2008. And then question about it being reviewed 12 years later. I don't know, Bill, has there been any discussion from the board to
well, the master plan, it was something that was done in cooperation with the FAA in terms of, I mentioned this National Airports Program and what was the need for the airport going forward. And the master plan said that, and looking at how the FAA views our airport as a national airport and a regional reliever airport, their conclusion was they'll one north-south runway at 7,000 feet was probably the best option. We could get a little better. We can get from 75% coverage to 80 to 90% coverage by going an additional 700 feet. And that's why it's in the master plan. But again, it would have to be driven by demand, and somebody would have to say why we need to do it. So the master plan is basically it for the next 30 years. That's what it was designed to be.
Yeah, that's a big document. I want to say it's over 500
and
pages long.
Don't quote me on the 30 years. It's not really a time, but it's a long-term plan for the airport. And again, the only thing that they change they might be is that at some point they might come and say, because of the kind of traffic and the proximity, if IND grows much more, they might say, well, maybe it's time to put a tower there. But there again, that's far in the future as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, we're way far off probably from that ever happening. All right, moving on. In terms of the land south of us, yes, is the bottom line. Homes can legally be built there because that area is zoned as residential. And we've fought against that for a while now. And the reality is Boone County zoned that area residential, I believe, many years ago. And it's still sits that way as we speak right now.
Yeah, it was zoned before it was even part of Zionsville. The only caveat to that is that you mentioned the runway clear zone, the so-called runway protection zone. The 7,000 foot RPZ stays on our property. If in the future we would extend that to 700 feet, then yes, the RPZ would extend into what is now the Cato property. And that would present some issues. But as far as the zoning is concerned, that area is zoned R3. So yeah, if the people want to build there, get approval to build, then they can build. I mean, from our perspective, it just isn't a good idea to put residences that close to an airport.
Now we'll move on to this next question here about freight or any other commercial uses. So if you're asking about cargo airlines, FedEx, UPS, they follow in the same rules as Part 139 for the most part. So you're not going to see FedEx fly any kind of aircraft in here. UPS, DHL, they require essentially the same services, whether it's firefighting, certain levels of security that we don't have here. So in terms of the commercial growth and the industrial growth around the airport, I don't see that bringing in any kind of cargo airline or anything like that. It just wouldn't be possible or feasible with FedEx's large hub just south of us here.
Yeah, the airport-related commercial operations that were envisioned in the land use study, as I recall, were what we had in mind was, say, a medical supply company who's making artificial hips and that sort of thing, and needs to send a part quickly to California, and would have a citation or a small business jet that they would use to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, the same aircraft that already fly into here.
Yeah, it's not talking about a hub for FedEx or UPS or anything like that. Mainly because they wouldn't. I mean, the airport wouldn't be desirable for them because we only have one runway, and they wouldn't. That would be difficult for them to do that, I would think. So.
All right, moving on. In terms of the house on the west side, I don't know exactly which house we're talking about. There are houses on the western side of the airport. And in theory, if the airport ever wanted to pursue a crosswind, we would have to buy that property in order to even consider that. But again, there's no immediate plans anytime soon to do a crosswind. So we haven't even looked at doing any of that property analysis at all. So.
I'll take this one, the next one on flight training. The Hamilton County makes no money from flight training. That's all. We lease the buildings, the terminal, the hangars and the terminal to the FBO, who's First Wing, and they run the flight school, and the only revenue we get is the rent for the building. We don't get any of the revenue from the flight school.
All right, take this next one here about the crosswind again. So the same approval process as the runway extension. Bill mentioned those 15 different meetings that had occurred, over the past decade or so. The same. So we would need public meetings. We would need environmental studies. We would need, meetings with Zionsville, meetings with Hamilton County, you name it. And again, we haven't even looked down that road yet. It's not like we've taken a step. We haven't even looked down the road. So it would be, even if you want to just start now, even if after this meeting we said, let's build that crosswind. I mean, we're probably a decade worth of meetings and FAA grants away from even beginning the process. And like I said, we haven't even discussed it as a possibility in the future. So I'd keep mowing your grass if I were you.
Yeah, I was going to say, sorry, Mr. O'Farrell, you're going to have to keep cutting your grass.
All right, so we have a question about the annual operations and increasing. Bill, you know more about the noise. I mean, nothing really changes in terms of the amount of operations.
No. Well, and an operation is a takeoff or a landing, and that can be a Challenger, or it can be a Cessna 172 or a Skycatcher. That doesn't differentiate the size of the aircraft or whether it's a piston engine or a jet engine. Right now, in terms of the number of aircraft that are based at our airport, the vast majority of those are single engine prop planes. I forget what number is it, 75 prop planes and 20 something jets. Is that what it was?
Yeah,
Sam?
yeah,
Yeah.
sitting at 99 right now.
And of course the traffic we get in, a lot of the traffic that comes in are aircraft that are not based there, particularly the business jets, net jets, and those kinds of companies, as well as corporations that are, like Dow used to come in all the time, a couple of times a week, bringing people in when they were doing the merger acquisition. But the vast number of airplanes, the vast percentage of that 41,000 annual operations are flight school and private pilots going out for the weekend, that kind of thing.
All right, so this next question is about, in the land use study that we had, the proposed developments around the airport that were mentioned. Bill, I don't know if you have more of specifics than with the land use kind of introduced.
Yeah, I don't think the airport, I wouldn't necessarily say the airport village concept is geared to further increasing traffic. What it was designed to do is to put value or economic value to the land there that would be compatible with an airport operation. So, not residential areas, not high density residential areas, that kind of thing that would be complained about noise. So I wouldn't say the airport village is necessarily geared for increasing traffic. It's to find a compatible use for the land that is compatible with having an airport there. And so the other thing about the medical, I don't. That's some speculation of what kinds of industry, light industry, would be most beneficial for Zionsville in terms of a tax base, but also in terms of compatibility with the airport itself. So,
and I think that kind of answers the next question here from Al about rezoning the northeast area of Zionsville. It's not about the crosswind; it's about the compatible types of industry around an airport. So the crosswind really doesn't have much to do with it at all. It has more to do with what works around an airport than anything else.
I know, so in the chat there seems to be some questions too. Maybe I can knock a few of those off.
Go ahead.
Somebody said, how do noise level studies show the impact on properties to the east and west? Well, you saw from the contours, the east-west of the runway is not as severely impacted by noise as the two ends are, because you got aircraft taking off and landing there. So for the noise contours to the east and west, pretty much stay on the airport property. Reliever Airport, somebody asked a question about Reliever Airport. Is being a reliever airport, with people wanting to avoid the security at Indianapolis Airport find it less restricting to enter the city? In other words, is security ever an issue? The answer is no. The reliever aspect of it has to do with the fact that, business jets and so forth coming in, you think a Citation or a Learjet is a big airplane, but compared to a 747, it's not. And so the whole idea of reliever airport is to relieve congestion around the airport and let the big boys have the airport, have their runway, not have to worry about the smaller guys. Planes that are coming in and out of our airport, if the plane is based there, if it's a corporate aircraft there, then once the whoever flies the plane most of the time is cleared, there's not much to worry about security. If somebody we don't know comes into the airport, let's say on a charter flight or something like that, then they go through a security. They look for IDs and that kind of thing at the FBO does at the terminal building.
And charter companies are required to
Right.
do a certain level of security themselves on the passengers that they fly. In terms of other security requirements, yeah, we don't have a TSA security line that you would see at Indianapolis International or anything like that. But we do maintain contact with the FBI, with the TSA about security concerns, and they do make site visits out here. So we do take security seriously. It's just a different kind of security than you would see at a commercial airport. And if you want to, jump back over to the questions and answers here. We've got 23 left in this box. We'll keep knocking these out here as quickly as we can. So Al is talking about planes flying over the 146th Street area. So in terms of where these aircraft fly, the answer is they fly all over, and they're allowed to. So when aircraft are flying around, they're in the National Airspace System. They're in the FAA's controlled airspace, and unless there's a specific restricted area type of airspace that's set up, aircraft are allowed to fly there. There's very, very few places in the country where aircraft aren't allowed to fly where they want. Now, they do need to maintain a certain altitude where they're flying, and typically that's 500 feet to 1,000 feet, depending on where they are. But there's really no restrictions that can be set up for certain areas and where they can and can't fly. I think we kind of talked about the package delivery. No, there's no plans for any kind of cargo airline. We can't have them, just like we can't have commercial aircraft. Bill mentioned one-off deliveries and whatnot. That is something that currently happens. We have a nonprofit company that comes through every once in a while that delivers medical organs around the country, and they'll load a doctor up from one of the local hospitals here with an organ and fly it on a private jet to where it needs to go. But that's about as complex as the package delivery we have here. It's not any kind of official cargo airline or anything. So next question, we kind of touched on that a little bit. So the FAA defines the minimum altitude that an aircraft could fly over most areas is about 500 feet to 1,000 feet. Depending on the density of the area. And it's loosely defined in terms of density, and it's not really clear. But if they're not flying over or near an airport, they should probably be at about 1,000 feet around this area, especially if you're more south of the airport. If you're north of the airport, 500 feet, there's no question about that. So it really does depend on where you are. But if you do feel that an aircraft is lower than that 500-foot mark, and you feel they're not coming into the airport, because that's another caveat. If they're coming into the airport, they can be as low as they need to be to land or take off at the airport. There is an FAA office that you can call and file a complaint with. I think they have an email as well. It's called an FSDO office, stands for Flight Service District or Flight Standards District Office. There's one in Plainfield. I believe it's right next to the airport. And that's part of their job, is to take those complaints, those noise complaints, and they look into that. They're the only regulatory body that can really enforce those rules. We don't have any ability to enforce FAA regulation here at the airport. So you do need to contact the FAA FSDO office. You can Google Indianapolis FSDO if you want some more information on that. Bill, do you know more about the area west of Michigan Road in the study?
It was proposed to stay as a nature preserve area mainly because of drainage, I believe. It's a watershed area for a brook that runs through there. It's not because of airport noise.
How many jets come in on an average day is the next question. It really depends. I mean, I work here at the airport. I wouldn't have a window right across my desk here, and I watch the planes come in and leave. It can vary from a couple, 2, 3, 4 if it's a slow day. Sometimes we'll get 10 to 15 if it's a busier day. It depends on the time of the year and the day of the week. for larger events, there might be a slight uptick. For the Indy 500, there's a slight uptick.
Yeah,
Same
we
thing with
don't
Big
see
Ten.
much. We don't see much of an uptick for the 500 or for the Big Ten championship. We get some when the golf tournaments here,
Yeah,
and of course when the Super Bowl was here, that was a whole other story.
Yeah, but yeah, typically these events don't bring in really a noticeable uptick. Maybe a couple more. Next question is about flight training increasing in the future. It's possible to say. I mean, it's private companies that run the flight training. And again, a lot of them are based out of other airports, and they just come here to practice and train.
Yeah.
My guess is
a lot of them that come up are Lift Academy, which is based out of Indianapolis International Airport. It's run by Republic Airlines to train new pilots for them. And they're restricted from operating at Indianapolis Airport between, I think, 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. because of the increased traffic at the International. So they tend to come up and stay at use our airport for their training at those hours.
Yeah, and in terms of flight training in general increasing, I see that possibly increasing. There's been an uptick in interest in flight training. The flight school that is based out of here with our FBO First Wing Jet Center has seen an uptick since the pandemic kind of kicked off. And as Bill alluded, that might be because people are looking for stuff to do. There is going to be a future airline shortage. They're anticipating it being pretty extreme here in the next 5 years or so with the shortage of pilots. And so there's a lot of people that are kind of pursuing that as a career. And that's where you kind of see that uptick in a company like Lyft Academy. So again, impossible to tell, but my guess personally is yes. Bill, do you?
It should be on. Is
Okay.
it on?
Yep. See it.
Yeah, I stuck it. I saw that coming, so I changed the slide a little while ago.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we're having this meeting in terms of the concerns of homeowners. We wanted to get the facts out there. We wanted to answer your questions, in this exact kind of format. Obviously, we'd rather have a in-person live event, but the amount of interest, we couldn't do that. So, we both of us, myself and Bill, we wanted to get in front of you, answer your questions, and be transparent. The airport's not hiding anything, but the reality is Hamilton County and Boone County are two of the fastest growing counties in the state, and the airport's growing alongside them. So, there's going to be an increase in aircraft noise and aircraft traffic, but that's, directly proportionate to the local area around us. Bill, I don't know if you want to talk about the noise sensitive language.
To answer your question, yes, it should have been included in the building agreements for Fieldstone and Brookhaven homeowners. That was the agreement that we struck with them, that they would put those in. It's language that is required by the state because it's in a noise sensitive area, and it should have been in the closing statements. And I am not an attorney, but I would think that because it's designated as a noise sensitive area, it would have to be in any closing documents.
I wouldn't say this is a rich man's airport. I would say we have a mix of people that have the capability to fly in chartered aircraft, and then we have a lot of your local residents and citizens in Boone and Hamilton County that do flight training out of here. We have a lot of high school students that come through here to learn how to fly. A lot of people that just fly as a hobby. So I don't know where that notion came from.
I seriously doubt the president gets wet, but
you got people that can hold it.
The covered or the canopy is an attraction for the airport. I wouldn't say it's what brings people there, but it is certainly nice, both when it's raining and snowing, that they can get on the aircraft without going outside.
Yes, it's just it's a feature of the airport. And we're not the only one that has that anymore. We used to be. In terms of land acquisition west of the airport, there's no immediate plans for any kind of land acquisition west of the airport that would require us to have a desire for that crosswind runway. And like I mentioned before, there's no desire at this point in time to do that.
I guess as far as building materials, I mean, really what they did in the, I mean, the options, I think what they did with the schools, they put in thicker drywall for the ceiling and also put in a lot more insulation in the ceiling. And that, both of those were in insulation in the walls. I mean, that's about the best thing you can do is make sure you're well insulated and put sound deadening materials that would require. Yes, probably was not shared by the developer. Well, there are projections, but I mean that's I don't know if I've got them. Like I said, they were showing us it. I think. Give me a minute. I'll come back to that. I got to go look something up here.
All right, we'll go on to the next question here about the town of Zionsville coordinating its land use plan. Yeah, we directly coordinated with Zionsville, with Mr. DeLong and his team for the land use study. That was a joint venture between the airport and Zionsville. And both of us have worked hand in hand with the consultant firm in terms of the development of the land use. That's why the originally scheduled open house meeting back in July, I think it was actually hosted by Zionsville. You know, they are our hosts tonight as well. So we do work hand in hand, especially on this land use study.
I found what I was looking for here. These are the projections that were made in the environmental assessment for operations, and you know what they're showing. For example, for 2021, they're showing a total of 66,000. We're at 41,000, and they projected out 2031 to 87.7, which again is very conservative. Really doubt that. And these are the kinds of, somebody asked a question, how many jet flights? These again were the projections for single engine versus jet and turbine. So, for example, the existing conditions, which was 2011, and again, it was probably not that high in reality. But most of the operations are single engine piston, as is the case for both 2021 and 2031. So.
And this might be a question for Wayne in terms of what departments or individuals in Zionsville exist to support the homeowners' questions about property values. Wayne, I don't know if you have a specific department you want to point anyone to.
Certainly our office can assist with these types of questions. Ultimately, property taxes are something that's established, the tax increment, the tax levels are established by the county, but certainly we're happy to assist with any specific questions anybody might have. Certainly this question was asked earlier in a different fashion. Certainly in the airport land use study, I mean, certainly that's something that's been looking to have another forward-facing conversation. Certainly was mentioned that with the open house that was scheduled, that was canceled just due to the large volume of interest and the inability to host such an event in a live fashion. Certainly we look to see that occur here, I would say in the next, hopefully next month and a half, due to the lessening COVID restrictions. Film at 11, we'll see how that changes. But certainly we're happy to discuss this topic in a little bit more depth at that time as well.
All right, we'll move on to the next one here about when the paving is planned. At this point, paving is definitely not planned for this year. The work that's being done right now is grading. So they're adding dirt and leveling off the area south of the airport for future paving, but no paving is occurring. If we're lucky, we might get paving in 2021, but it might also be 2022 at this point. So we might not actually see operations utilizing the extended runway until 2022. maybe 2023. It all depends on funding from the FAA. That's kind of our holdup with the project right now.
The FAA funds 90% of the project, and the state picks up 5%, and the local picks up 5%. So we submit a request for funding to the EPA or FAA, and depending upon what funds they have available, we may get it, we may not. And so, like I say, and even if you're awarded the money, you can get it as early as April or as late as October. Well, if we get our 2021 grant for paving in October, we're certainly not going to start a project like that going into winter. So it would wait until the spring of 2022 before the paving even starts.
All right, then our next question here is meeting regarding the land use plan. Bill, have you heard about any rescheduled meeting?
Well, I think Wayne just addressed it sometime in the next month,
yeah,
or month and a half.
We're trying to do that in fall at some point.
Yes, certainly look to host that. Hopefully in the next 6 weeks. It's certainly that public input session is critical to any effort to write such a plan. And certainly, again, COVID might change things a little bit, but we need to adapt and find a way to collect that public input.
All right, so yeah, when that is finalized, that will be on the Zionsville website, same as this meeting here. So that will be publicly announced. Next question, we've talked about this, so I'm not going to harp on it, but no, there's no plan for any kind of cargo airline to set up here. It's not possible for us to support them. There's no maximum number per se. You know, the runway over time will need to be repaired, and portions of it will probably have to be replaced as more and more operations occur. But there isn't an exact number per se that if we hit 80,000, then we'll have to, you know, change up what we do. It's just reoccurring maintenance that occurs, whether it's repainting of the runway as it gets worn out by aircraft landing, or removing of rubber deposits from aircraft wheels. But there's not a maximum number of operations that the runway can handle.
The next question. Flight training, I hope the flight training, yeah, flight training does not occur under extreme windy conditions. But it doesn't take extreme wind to tell a plane which way it has to take off. Also, planes that are taking off to the north are going to be arriving from the south, and those that are taking off to the south are going to be arriving from the north. So either way, they're going to be coming over, since we only have one runway, and with, as Sam mentioned, the pattern is kind of a rectangle, with one side of the rectangle down the center line of the runway and the other side of the rectangle extending off to the left side of the field. So, or to the right side with the runway to the left. So regardless of what direction they're going, they're going to be either taking off or landing from the south.
Yeah, and in terms of some kind of threshold for you know, how high the winds are and if a flight training will occur, that's kind of up to the independent company. As far as I'm aware, there's no regulation that states if the winds are over a certain, you know, over 10 knots or over 15 knots, that an aircraft can't perform flight training, but that's typically left up to that individual company. In terms of the growth of the airport, so I don't know, I can't speak to specific years. I can tell you that the way NDOT does the operational numbers that you see on that Excel sheet, if you look at it, there's some kind of, I believe it's an asterisk.
You just muted yourself.
All right, I'm back. So if you look at that Excel spreadsheet that you can find on the NDOT website, there's different colors on there. If you see a blue color, that means that for that year, that airport had a physical piece of equipment that was at the airport counting aircraft. If you do not see the blue color, I'm back. If you do not see the blue color, then that means that there is some kind of calculation that was used, some kind of formula that they've developed to count the aircraft. So if you look at that Excel spreadsheet, you can see that for most years, we actually don't have physical equipment out here calculating airport operation numbers. We typically rely on that formula or that calculation. So that might be why you see spikes in certain years and lower in other years, is the disparity between the calculation that they use versus having actual equipment. Bill, I don't know if you've seen a higher spike in traffic in some years than others personally, but
no, I mean, it tends to, the traffic, particularly the business traffic, tends to ebb and flow with the economic environment. The other thing in terms of numbers of operations, like Sam said, the only ones that we can definitely have 100% confidence in is if you've got a counter out there that's counting it, or they're flying an instrument approach and the data is being collected by the FAA. For the average weekend pilot, if he goes out and just does touch and goes and a few circles around the airport, there's really nobody counting that. He's not flying on the flight plan, and there's no counter out there. So it's, as Sam mentioned, a lot of it is just using formulas based upon the type of aircraft there and a bunch of other factors to come up with an estimate.
Yeah, and you should be able to see the document I just showed on the screen there. So I've highlighted our airport here. So you can see what I'm talking about. The dark blue color means that there's an actual piece of equipment that was out there counting aircraft. And if it's just a kind of a light black text there, then it's just that calculation. So that might account for the different numbers you're seeing. As you can see, we haven't had equipment out here in a couple of years. So these numbers are essentially estimated. Hopefully we'll have some equipment out here in the next year or two. That'll give us a better idea of where we actually currently stand with our traffic count. Okay, let me pull up the next question here.
Yes, you can learn to fly at the airport. Contact the First Wing Jet Center flight school.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, if you are interested, the First Wing Jet Center here at the airport, they do have their own flight school here. They'd be happy to talk to you about that. You can Google the airport or Google First Wing Jet Center and they'll come right up. We've been pushing for rezoning, specifically of that area south of the airport that's zoned residential. I don't know if there's any kind of date that's been set for a decision. None that I'm aware of. I'm not sure if you've heard anything, Bill.
No, I mean, zoning is not something we get involved with in terms of off the airport anyway. And that would be an issue that if someone wants to, well, I guess it's the plan commission that ultimately decides that. And depending on the arguments it made pro and con, if somebody comes with a proposal to rezone and they can make their case, I guess it gets rezoned. If they can, it doesn't. Maybe Wayne can fill us in on some of the details of that.
Well, certainly not wanting to move this conversation into a full dissertation. But yes, you're exactly right, Bill. Zoning is a legislative act. It involves the Plan Commission and the legislative body for the town, in this case, the town council. It's a two stage process with 8 or so steps. Could take 60 or more days, but yes, it's a process that the property owner, the town council, or the Plan Commission could potentially initiate.
All right, I'm going to shift our focus to the chat box here real fast.
Yeah, there's a lot here we haven't picked up on.
So just so everyone's aware, we're working off the Q&A question box right now. But so if you do have a question, I would suggest putting your questions in there. It's just easier, I think, for us to look at. But we'll take a look at some of these here. There is a question about the safety record at the airport, and could you describe an aborted landing that might take place and its effects? So safety record has been excellent. I there was an incident that occurred. When did the deer incident occur, Bill? Was that 2015, 2016? With the
That was, yeah, at least about 2015, I guess. Yeah.
I think that was the last significant incident we had at the airport, and that involved a deer that had run onto the runway and caused a Cessna Citation jet to go off the runway. But I don't believe there were any injuries reported with that incident. No.
Well, except for the deer.
The deer did not fare too well. Everyone on the aircraft was very much okay. So that was the last any kind of level of incident we've had. And looking back, I don't believe we've ever had any kind of fatality at the airport, at least not since the counties operated
one
it.
comment about the safety record and what you describe in a boarded landing. In part, that's one of the reasons we define what's known as a runway protection zone. And that is to say, because a lot of times if you're going to have a problem with an airplane, it's usually right around the time it's ready to take off, and you've got that safety zone sticking out in front of the runway, both in terms of takeoffs, but also landings. If someone overshoots the runway and goes into the runway protection zone. So there's very restrictions on what can be in an RPZ. Can't have any structures in there. Can be no trees. Can be nothing that's going to potentially come in contact with an aircraft in trouble. As far as outside of that, there's really not. I mean, the safety record has been very good at the airport, knock wood. A lot of I think some of the FAA will say that if an aircraft's going to have trouble on takeoff, it's usually within 2 minutes after takeoff. And depending on the aircraft, it could be miles down the road by that time. So I don't know if that answers the question, but it's a hard question to answer without more specifics. So.
Yeah, with an aborted landing, typically what you see is an aircraft performs a go around. So that means that they're approaching the airport, and at some point during that final approach phase, the pilot decides, we're not going to touch down, we're going to try again, and they'll power up normally at 1,000, 2,000 feet above the ground, and will basically go around. They will fly over the airport and come back around and attempt a landing again. So that's typically what we see for an aborted landing. Aborted takeoff, it's a little bit different. They normally stay on the ground, and they'll power up and then basically power back down and brake and try to take off again. Neither one is very common. In fact, I've only seen one aborted takeoff since I've worked at the airport for the last 4 months. So.
There was one aircraft a few years ago that was in the pattern, had just taken off and was in the pattern, and so obviously it was relatively speaking low, and it was a student pilot at the controls, and they hit it. It was actually a thunderstorm was about to come, and they hit a downdraft, and the plane was pushed down, and the student pilot lost control and hit the ground. Nobody was hurt, fortunately, but that's the last, and that happened on the the east side of the airport. Still on the airport land, but it was on the east side. Like Sam says, most of the incidents that I'm aware of in the last several years have been aircraft that are on the ground, and either they run off the runway, they have a tire blow or something like that, and they run off the runway, but they're not in the air at that time.
All right, we have another question here on the chat side about the public viewing the full land use plan. So that is going to be unveiled at that open house that we talked about a little bit earlier, hopefully in the next 6 weeks or so. For now, we're just posting the executive summary. And then once we have that open house and present the information in that land use plan, then we'll make that more readily available to the public. And then there's a question about, I'm not sure if it's a question, but something about zoning for the industrial area on the east side. Again, there'll be more information on that in the land use study that comes out here in the next couple of weeks.
Well, and I guess they may be referring to the fact that on the other side of 1200, which is our eastern boundary, that's Hamilton County, not Zionsville, not Boone County. So the answer, I guess, to that is we're trying to get the same kind of study done by Hamilton County for the eastern side of the airport that Zionsville and we have done for the western side of the airport. We obviously want them to be consistent.
Yeah, and that will be a different study that comes out that is separate from what we're working on with Zionsville. Back to the Q&A. We only have 6 questions left, so we'll knock these out here. First one is from Chip, and the question is about the increased percentage in traffic we expect to see in the next couple of years. As I mentioned before, we don't have a specific outlook. Our numbers have gone up a couple thousand a year. If you look back at that Excel spreadsheet, they've gone up relatively steadily, a couple thousand a year. So I would expect that to stay the same, especially because we're not expecting the runway to be finished for the next couple of years or so. I would say
these are the forecasts that were in the study, but it's forecasting. It says 66,000 for the year 2021, and we're at about 40,000. So
yeah, we're way off.
45,000.
Yeah, we're way off the numbers there.
It's hard to predict.
Yeah, maybe 45,000 over the next couple of years. That might be a safe number.
Something like 5% increase, maybe. If that. I mean, there again, it all depends on the business climate. I mean, certainly this year, traffic is way down. I mean, compared to what it was at at least during the shutdown period. But our business traffic pretty much dried up. Even now, a lot of the traffic that's coming in are charters that people want to go on vacation. They don't want to fly commercial, so they'll rent get a seat on a Learjet or something.
All right. We have a question that might be more for Wayne about Zionsville's position on the issue.
So this question here is a very large and dynamic, has an answer to that, and certainly it's not something that could be covered in totality here. Certainly the land use plan would speak to these, and this is one of the reasons of many that we are conducting the land use planning exercise to speak to the noise and protections for the quality of Zionsville that we enjoy today and want to enjoy in the future, certainly balancing that against a few different factors, including the FAA's entitlements that are in place to expand the runway of the Indianapolis Executive Airport. These are items that are happening regardless of decisions that are made by the town, its leadership. But this study, which has been mentioned a few times this evening, is still in draft and is looking to gather additional public input in order to finalize it. So what will be presented here soon will be that draft, but still in fact gathering mode related to the answers to some of these questions that are being brought up this evening.
Thank you, Wayne. And thank you, Al, for those nice words. We appreciate it. We're certainly trying to answer any and all questions that are out there. So we have 4 more questions on here. If anyone has any more questions, now is your time to do that. We'll move on to a question from Tim. In terms of the dirt mound at the airport, so part of it is being deconstructed now, though it might not seem like it. It has actually shrunk marginally as they're doing work right now at the south end of the airport. There's more work that needs to be done in the future. They're going to need to do more grading work, more dirt work on the south side for the taxiway. Right now they're focusing on the runway area, and they need to do more for the taxiway. So it's looking like that'll be a 2021 project. So the dirt mound might be there until some point in 2021. That's my estimate at this point. Wayne, it looks like you have another question for you from Dave.
Certainly, we can answer that question very directly. As to any public filings, any docketed petitions that are related to the land to the south as referenced in the question, the answer is no. There is nothing on file. If there was something on file, it would be posted to the town's website. There's a petition page related to active petitions with the Plan Commission. A public notice sign would be installed on the property by the town to indicate to the public that activities are occurring. If the question is more geared to, has a document been emailed or left at town hall, let's go back any number of years, the answer is yes. There's been several parties that have submitted to the town information about their potential ideas of what that property could look like if it was developed. Certainly this goes back to all the way to 2008 when the county rezoned the parcel to the R3 classification. There's a set of commitments that are discoverable, that are recorded against the property. That document contains drawings and information related to that concept at that time. So there are items in Town Hall that have been submitted over the years that illustrate concepts related to what that parcel could yield if it were to be developed, but there are no actual construction plans or any documents on file currently pending with the Plan Commission or Town Council related to development of that parcel.
All right. Thank you for that answer, Wayne. We have a question about 20 years ago, an area around the airport potentially developed into an industrial park. Bill, do you know more about that history?
No, I don't. I think one of the issues in why the land use study was being developed is a lot of the land that around the airport that had been agricultural for some time, the owners or heirs are considering trying to sell the land for some kind of development other than farming. And so that was a big concern that we had in terms of one of the reasons behind the land use study was to say, let's think about what's the best use of that land in terms of not only the airport, but the economic viability for Zionsville and the residential areas around there, so we don't have an uncontrolled growth. So I hope that answers the question.
All right, thank you, Bill. And then very last one is actually for Wayne regarding the purchase of the airport. I don't know if you have more information on that, Wayne.
I do not. While I've been driving past the airport since 1982, I do not have any background on that. I was not employed by the town until 2012, so I have no background as to that topic.
My understanding, this is again, I don't have firsthand knowledge. My understanding was that the Ray Van Sickle wanted to retire and sell the airport. I think it was offered to Boone County, and Boone County felt they couldn't swing it. At the time, Hamilton County had a Board of Aviation Commissioners who was looking at maintaining and protecting the airports within Hamilton County. And when that one became available, since it borders, one part of the airport actually is on the border, they could legally acquire it and run it. So that's what they did.
Okay, I think that's a good summary there. And with that seems to be our last question. Thank you very much. Yeah, we're happy to kind of go through all these questions here and answer anything you guys have. Looks like Bill put up our email address here. It's airport.info@hamiltoncounty.in.gov. If you think of any more questions that you may have or anything that comes up that you didn't ask, please feel free to email that. My information is not hard to come by. Google the airport, I'll come up, or First Wing will come up and they can forward your calls to me. So, if I know there are bound to be more questions that arise, so I'm more than happy to share and comment and talk on anything that might come up. So with that, I think we're done. Bill, Wayne, I don't know if you have anything else to add, but I think that's it for me. I think 2 hours was pretty good.
Like I said, feel free to send us an email if you have more questions that we didn't get to. Be glad to answer them.
Thank you, everyone, for attending this evening. Appreciate everybody's input. Thank you. This ends.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Wayne, for setting this up and being the host.
Oh, happy to do it. Take care. Thank you. Good evening, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.